Hello, story lovers. Tonight, we're diving into a tale of passion, secrets, and choices that could change everything. Hearts will be broken, love will be tested, and every twist will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, hit like, subscribe, share it with someone who loves a powerful love story, and tap the bell so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Ready? Let's begin. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom glittered like a jewelry box under the crystal chandeliers, but Natasha Monroe felt nothing but ice in her veins as she stepped through the gilded doors. 4 years. 4 years since she'd fled this city in disgrace, and now she was back as the keynote speaker for the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, her tech company's latest acquisition making headlines nationwide. Her black Valentino gown hugged every curve she'd earned through late nights and stress-filled days building her empire from nothing. The emerald necklace at her throat, worth more than her childhood home, caught the light as she moved through the crowd of San Francisco's elite. She'd worked for this moment, this return as a conqueror rather than a victim. Natasha Monroe, as I live and breathe. The voice made her blood freeze. She turned slowly, her practiced smile faltering for just a heartbeat as she faced Helena Monroe, her mother, draped in pearls and disapproval. The woman who'd chosen sides 4 years ago and made her choice devastatingly clear. Mother. Natasha's voice carried the polish of boardrooms and power lunches. You look well. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised you'd show your face here eventually. Helena's gaze raked over her daughter's obvious success with something that might have been pride in anyone else. In Helena Monroe, it looked like calculation. Though I admit, I didn't expect you to make such a spectacle of yourself. Before Natasha could respond, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, and her heart stopped completely. Ryan Mitchell walked toward their small circle, his arm wrapped possessively around Camila Monroe Mitchell. Her sister looked exactly the same, still beautiful, still radiating the kind of effortless perfection that had always made Natasha feel like a shadow. Hello, Tasha. Ryan's voice held the weight of 4 years and 1,000 unspoken apologies. You look incredible. Natasha felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her throat, but she'd spent 4 years learning to weaponize her pain. She smiled, the kind of smile that had closed billion-dollar deals and destroyed competitors. Ryan. Camila. She nodded to each in turn. Congratulations on your marriage. I heard about the wedding in the society pages. We tried to invite you, Camila lied smoothly, but your assistant said you were in Tokyo closing some important deal. The fabrication hung between them like poison gas. They all knew no invitation had been sent. How thoughtful. Natasha's smile never wavered. I was indeed busy. Building the tech empire that Forbes featured last month. Perhaps you saw it? The cover story about female entrepreneurs who turned betrayal into billions? Ryan flinched, but before anyone could respond, a presence materialized beside Natasha like smoke given form. A hand settled on the small of her back, warm and possessive, sending an unexpected jolt through her carefully controlled composure. Apologies for interrupting. The voice was velvet over steel, carrying an accent that spoke of expensive schools and old money. But I believe our table is being called for dinner. Natasha turned and found herself looking into eyes the color of storm clouds, set in a face that belonged on magazine covers. The man beside her was tall enough to make her feel delicate despite her 4-inch heels, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and shoulders that strained the seams of his perfectly tailored tuxedo. Marcus Kane, he introduced himself to the group, though his attention remained fixed on Natasha as if she were the only person in the room worth noticing. Ms. Monroe's companion for the evening. She'd never seen this man before in her life. How lovely to meet you, Helena simpered, clearly impressed by Marcus's obvious wealth and status. Are you in technology as well? I have interests in various fields. Marcus's smile was polite but distant. Though tonight, my only interest is ensuring Natasha enjoys her triumphant return home. The word triumphant hit like a perfectly aimed arrow. Natasha watched her family absorb the implication that she was here not as a refugee returning to lick old wounds, but as a conqueror surveying her territory. Well, Camilla's voice had developed a sharp edge. How wonderful that Natasha has found someone who appreciates her ambition, among other qualities. Marcus's hand moved slightly on Natasha's back, and she had to fight the urge to lean into his warmth. Though I suspect you already know how extraordinary she is. The silence stretched until Helena cleared her throat. Yes, well, we shouldn't keep you. I'm sure you have important people to see. As they walked away, Natasha waited until they were out of earshot before turning to face her mysterious savior. Up close, he was even more devastating, with the kind of bone-deep confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. Thank you, she said quietly. Though I should point out that I didn't need rescuing. I know. His smile was predatory and gorgeous. That's what made it interesting. Most people would have crumbled under that level of family toxicity. You turned it into a performance. And you decided to join the show without an invitation? I've been watching you all evening, he admitted without shame. Waiting for the right moment to introduce myself. When I saw them circling like vultures, I thought it was time to even the odds. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. There was intelligence there, and calculation, but also something darker. Something that recognized the shadows in her own soul. Marcus Kane, she repeated his name slowly. Should I know who you are? His laugh was low and rich and entirely without humor. I certainly hope not. That would complicate things considerably. Before she could ask what he meant, the lights dimmed and a voice announced that dinner was being served. Marcus offered his arm with old-world courtesy, but there was nothing courtly about the heat in his eyes. Shall we see what other surprises this evening has in store? He asked. As they walked toward their table, Natasha caught sight of Ryan watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. Jealousy? Regret? Something sharper and more dangerous? She had the sudden, unsettling feeling that she'd just walked into something much more complicated than a charity gala. And the man beside her, for all his charm and perfectly timed rescue, was not the white knight he appeared to be. The question was, did she care? The private dining room Marcus led her to overlooked the city skyline, San Francisco spread out below them like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Only 2 place settings adorned the intimate table, and Natasha realized with a start that he'd somehow arranged for them to dine alone while the main gala continued in the ballroom below. This is quite the power move, she observed, accepting the chair he pulled out for her. Most people would consider it presumptuous. Most people don't interest me. Marcus moved with liquid grace as he settled across from her, his storm-gray eyes never leaving her face. You, however, have my complete attention. A server appeared as if summoned by thought, pouring wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Natasha noticed Marcus didn't touch his glass, while she found herself needing the liquid courage more than she cared to admit. So tell me, Marcus Kane, she leaned back in her chair, studying him over the rim of her wine glass, what exactly do you do when you're not rescuing tech entrepreneurs from their toxic families? I solve problems. His answer was deliberately vague. People come to me when conventional solutions have failed them. That's beautifully cryptic. Are you a lawyer? Consultant? Professional mystery man? His laugh was genuinely amused this time. Something like that. What about you? I've read the Forbes article, of course, but I'm more interested in what drove you to build that empire. What were you running from? The question was casual, but Natasha caught the calculating gleam in his eyes. This man didn't ask anything without purpose. Who says I was running from anything? Maybe I was running towards something. In my experience, the people who build the fastest and climb the highest are the ones with the most to escape. Marcus leaned forward slightly. The question is whether they're running from their past or toward revenge. The accuracy of his observation sent a chill down her spine. And which category do you think I fall into? Both. He said it with absolute certainty. You built your company to prove you could. But you came back here tonight to prove they couldn't break you. That's not healing, Natasha. that's warfare. She set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. You seem to know an awful lot about my motivations for someone I met 20 minutes ago. I make it my business to understand people who interest me. Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. And you, Natasha Monroe, are fascinating. A woman who turned public humiliation into private triumph. Who transformed betrayal into billions. Most people would have simply disappeared. But not you. And what about you? She deflected his probing with practiced ease. What's your story? What drove you to become a professional problem solver? Something flickered across his features, gone so quickly she almost missed it. Pain, maybe. Or guilt. Let's just say I understand the appeal of reinvention. The evasion only made her more curious, but before she could press further, his phone buzzed against the table. Marcus glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. Excuse me. He answered the call with clipped efficiency. This isn't a good time. A pause. No, that timeline is unacceptable. Another pause, longer this time. Handle it. Whatever it takes. He ended the call and looked up to find her studying him intently. Problem at the office? She asked lightly. Something like that. But the relaxed charm from earlier had been replaced by something colder, more dangerous. I'm afraid I may need to cut our evening short. Of course. Natasha stood, recognizing a dismissal when she heard one. Thank you for dinner. And for the rescue earlier. Wait. Marcus caught her wrist as she turned to leave, his touch electric against her skin. I didn't mean, this isn't how I wanted this to end. The vulnerability in his voice stopped her cold. When she looked back at him, the mask had slipped completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. Then what did you want? She asked softly. Instead of answering, he pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees, her pulse hammering at the sudden intimacy. His hand settled on her hips, burning through the silk of her dress. I wanted to know if you taste as dangerous as you look, he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her hip bone. The air between them crackled with electricity. Natasha knew she should step away, should maintain the professional distance she'd perfected over 4 years of building her empire. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by the heat in his eyes and the promise of something that had nothing to do with business or revenge. And now? Her voice came out huskier than she intended. Now I know I was right to be careful. His hands tightened on her hips. You're going to be trouble. The best kind? The dangerous kind. Before she could respond, he stood in one fluid motion, bringing them chest to chest. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they simply stared at each other, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Then his phone buzzed again, shattering the moment like glass. Marcus cursed under his breath and stepped back, the distance between them suddenly feeling like a canyon. I have to go. But this isn't over. Isn't it? Natasha straightened her dress, her professional mask sliding back into place. We're both busy people, Mr. Kane. I fly back to Silicon Valley tomorrow. No. The word was flat, final. You don't get to dismiss this. Whatever this is. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. Then what are you suggesting? I'm saying I'm not done with you yet. Marcus moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. And I don't think you're done with me either. He was right, and they both knew it. The attraction between them was magnetic, undeniable, and absolutely dangerous. My hotel is the St. Regis, she heard herself saying. Room 1247. Marcus turned, surprise flickering across his features. Are you sure? No. The admission was honest, raw. But I'm tired of being careful. Tired of being safe. Safety is overrated anyway. His smile was dark promise and threat combined. Give me 2 hours to handle this crisis. Then I'll show you just how dangerous we can be together. As Natasha made her way back to the main ballroom to retrieve her purse, she caught sight of Ryan standing alone near the bar. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. She had the unsettling feeling that Ryan knew exactly who Marcus Kane was. And that whatever game she'd just agreed to play, the stakes were higher than she realized. But as she stepped into the elevator that would take her back to her hotel, all she could think about was the heat in Marcus's eyes and the promise he'd made about showing her how dangerous they could be together. 2 hours had never felt so long. Natasha's hotel suite felt like a cage as she paced the marble floors, still wearing the black gown that had been her armor for the evening. The San Francisco skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, but all she could focus on was the clock on the nightstand. 1 hour and 43 minutes since Marcus had made his promise. She'd changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on a silk robe that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable. The contradiction suited her mood perfectly. When the knock came at exactly 2 hours, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. She opened the door to find Marcus leaning against the frame, still in his tuxedo but with his tie loosened and his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked dangerous and disheveled and absolutely magnetic. "You came," she said, hating how breathless she sounded. "Did you think I wouldn't?" He stepped into the suite without invitation, his presence filling the space like smoke. "I told you I wasn't done with you." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded loud in the sudden silence. They stood facing each other across the elegant sitting room, the tension between them crackling like live wires. "Drink?" Natasha moved toward the bar, needing something to do with her hands. "I don't think alcohol is what either of us needs right now." Marcus's voice was rough velvet as he watched her pour herself a glass of wine with shaking fingers. "You're nervous." "I don't get nervous." The lie fell flat between them. "No, I imagine you don't. Which makes this interesting." He moved closer, predatory and graceful. "When was the last time someone made you feel off balance?" The question hit too close to home. "I could ask you the same thing." "Fair enough." Marcus stopped just within arm's reach, close enough that she could smell his cologne and the faint scent of danger that seemed to cling to him. "The answer is never. Not until tonight." Before she could respond, he reached out and traced the line of her collarbone with one finger, the touch sending electricity racing through her veins. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, his hand settling at the base of her throat where her pulse hammered visibly. "About who I am. About why I was really at that gala tonight." Something in his tone made her blood chill. "What do you mean?" Marcus stepped back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that reminded her painfully of Ryan. "I wasn't there by coincidence, Natasha. I was there because of you." The wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a cascade of crystal and blood-red liquid. "What?" "Someone hired me to watch you. To get close to you." The words fell between them like stones. "To find out what you're planning for your family." Betrayal tasted like copper in her mouth. "Someone hired you?" "Who?" "Your sister." The world tilted sideways. Natasha gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling, her carefully constructed composure crumbling like sand. "Camila hired you to spy on me?" "She's worried about what your return might mean for her marriage, her reputation." Marcus's voice was clinical now, professional. "She wanted to know if you were planning some kind of revenge. And you agreed to help her." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Yes." The admission hung between them like a blade. Natasha felt something vital break inside her chest, the hope she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since he'd appeared at her side like a guardian angel. "Was any of it real?" she asked quietly. "Tonight, this attraction between us?" Marcus was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "That's the problem. It wasn't supposed to be real. But the moment I saw you handle your family with such elegant brutality, the moment you turned their cruelty into a performance, I was lost. Lost enough to betray your client? There was bitter humor in her voice. Lost enough to warn you that you're in danger. The words hit her like ice water. What do you mean, danger? Marcus moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. Your sister isn't just worried about social embarrassment, Natasha. She's desperate. Ryan's law firm is failing, hemorrhaging clients and money. They need your father's inheritance to survive. My father died 3 years ago. The will was settled. The trust fund, yes. But there's more. A secret inheritance that only gets distributed if both daughters are deemed worthy by the estate's standards. Marcus turned back to her, his expression grim. Camila knows that if you contest the family's treatment of you, if you expose what really happened 4 years ago, the trustees could find her unworthy. Natasha's mind raced. I never knew about any secret inheritance. Because your mother and sister made sure you didn't. But now you're successful enough to hire lawyers who might dig deeper, powerful enough to cause real problems for them. So they sent you to, what? Seduce me into silence? They sent me to find out what you're planning so they could get ahead of it. Neutralize any threats. Marcus's jaw tightened. But the more time I spent watching you tonight, the more I realized they're not just afraid of your success. They're afraid of your pain. Meaning? Meaning a woman who builds an empire out of betrayal doesn't do it for money. She does it for justice. And justice, in your hands, could destroy everything they've built on your back. The accuracy of his assessment was terrifying. Because he was right. Every late night, every deal closed, every milestone reached had been fueled by the memory of standing in that ballroom 4 years ago, watching her life implode while her family smiled. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Why betray them for someone you've known for a few hours? Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and self-deprecating. Because I recognize a kindred spirit when I see one. Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by the people who should have protected you. Is that what happened to you? His silence was answer enough. What kind of problems do you usually solve, Marcus? Another long pause. The permanent kind. The words settled over her like winter fog, cold and suffocating. Are you telling me my sister hired an assassin? I'm telling you that your sister hired someone who specializes in making problems disappear. What I'm not telling her is that you're not a problem to be solved. Marcus turned from the window, his storm gray eyes intense. You're a hurricane that's been building strength for 4 years, and when you finally make landfall, nothing is going to survive. You sound almost admiring. I am. His smile was sharp and wholly without warmth. It's been a long time since I met someone more dangerous than me. The revelation should have terrified her. Instead, it sent a dark thrill through her bloodstream. Here was someone who understood the price of betrayal, who recognized the weapon she'd forged from her pain. So what happens now? She asked. Now you have a choice. Marcus moved closer, the predator in him fully visible now. You can go back to Silicon Valley and pretend tonight never happened. Build your empire and leave your family to their small, petty victories. Or you can let me help you take everything they think they've stolen from you. His voice was silk over steel. Starting with that secret inheritance. Natasha stared at him, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd been sent to destroy her and instead was offering to help her destroy everyone else. And what do you get out of it? Marcus stepped close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, close enough that his answer was a whisper against her lips. I get to watch you burn it all down. Before she could respond, before she could think about the wisdom of allying herself with a man who solved problems permanently, he kissed her. The kiss was fire and fury and promises that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with mutual destruction. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Natasha knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Partners? Marcus asked against her mouth. Partners, she agreed, sealing her fate with a word. Neither of them noticed the red light blinking on the hotel room's phone, indicating that someone had been listening to every word of their conversation. 3 weeks later, Natasha sat in her San Francisco attorney's office, surrounded by documents that painted a picture of corruption so deep it took her breath away. Marcus had been thorough in his investigation, uncovering layers of financial manipulation that went back to her father's death. The secret trust is worth $47 million, her lawyer, Patricia Chen, explained as she spread the papers across the mahogany conference table. Your father established it specifically to ensure both his daughters would be provided for, regardless of family dynamics. But the trustees have discretionary power over distribution, Natasha observed, scanning the legal documents. Exactly. And 3 of the 5 trustees are your mother's closest friends. Patricia's expression was grim. They've been delaying distribution for 3 years, claiming they need to evaluate both beneficiaries' moral character and family loyalty. Marcus, who had been silently studying the financial records, looked up with predatory satisfaction. Meanwhile, your sister and Ryan have been slowly liquidating your father's other assets to cover their debts. They've borrowed against the house, sold off investments, even pawned your grandmother's jewelry. All while telling the trustees that I'm an ungrateful daughter who abandoned the family in their time of need, Natasha added bitterly. It gets worse. Marcus slid another folder across the table. They've been feeding the trustees carefully crafted stories about your instability and vindictive nature, making sure that when the trust is finally distributed, you won't see a penny. Natasha stared at the character assassination laid out in black and white, feeling the familiar burn of betrayal in her throat. Even after 4 years and all her success, they were still trying to destroy her. But we can fight this, Patricia said confidently. With the evidence you've uncovered, we can prove financial misconduct, maybe even fraud. How long would that take? Natasha asked. In the courts? 3 to 5 years. Maybe longer if they fight hard. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Or we could resolve this much more quickly. Both women turned to him, and Natasha felt a familiar chill at the calculating gleam in his eyes. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking your sister made a crucial mistake when she hired me. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be audio files. She gave me access to all their communications, their plans, their fears, including some very interesting recordings. He pressed play, and suddenly the room filled with Camila's voice, crystal clear and utterly damning. I don't care what it costs, Camila was saying. Natasha cannot get her hands on that trust money. If she does, she'll have the resources to really come after us. We need to make sure the trustees understand exactly what kind of person she is. Ryan's voice joined the conversation. What if she lawyers up? She's got the money for it now. Then we escalate. Marcus has other skills besides investigation. Sometimes problems need permanent solutions. The recording ended in silence so complete that Natasha could hear her own heartbeat. They were planning to have me killed, she said numbly. If legal pressure didn't work, yes. Marcus's voice was emotionless. Your sister was very clear about her willingness to go that far. Patricia looked shaken. We need to call the police immediately. No, Natasha said quietly, an idea forming in the darkness of her mind. We're going to do something better. She turned to Marcus, seeing her own hunger for justice reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Can you arrange a meeting? Tell them you have information about my plans that requires an in-person briefing? Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. Already done. Tonight, 8 o'clock, at your mother's house. They think I'm going to tell them how to neutralize the threat you represent. Perfect. Natasha stood, her movements fluid and predatory. Because I have a very different presentation in mind. That evening, Natasha sat in her rental car across the street from her childhood home, watching the lights in the windows and remembering the girl who had once believed her family loved her. That girl was long gone, burned away in the crucible of betrayal and reborn as something harder, more dangerous. Marcus appeared at her passenger window like a shadow, sliding into the seat beside her. They're all here, he reported. Your mother, Camila, Ryan. They're very excited to hear how you're planning to self-destruct. Let's not keep them waiting. They walked up the familiar path together, but instead of going to the front door, Marcus led her around to the garden entrance. Through the French doors, Natasha could see her family gathered in the sitting room, champagne glasses in hand as if they were celebrating. They think they've won, she observed. Let them think that a little longer. Marcus handed her a small recording device. Everything they say tonight will be admissible in court. Natasha pocketed the device and straightened her shoulders. For years of building her empire had taught her that the most devastating attacks came from positions of apparent weakness. Marcus opened the French doors without knocking, and the conversation inside stopped abruptly as Natasha stepped into the room. "Hello, family," she said pleasantly. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but Marcus tells me you're all very concerned about my future plans." Helena Monroe went white as bone china. Camila spilled champagne down the front of her designer dress. Only Ryan managed to maintain his composure, though Natasha could see his hands shaking. "Natasha," he began, "what are you doing here?" "I'm here because someone seems to think I'm a problem that needs solving." She moved further into the room, Marcus a silent shadow behind her. "Someone who's been feeding lies to my father's trustees and plotting to ensure I never see my inheritance." "I don't know what you're talking about," Camila said, but her voice was pitched too high. "Really?" Natasha pulled out her phone and pressed play. Camila's own voice filled the room, every damning word crystal clear. The part about permanent solutions hit like a physical blow, and Natasha watched her sister's face crumble. "That's taken out of context," Ryan said desperately. "Is it?" Natasha stopped the recording. "Because it sounds like conspiracy to commit murder to me. I'm sure the police will find it interesting too." "You can't prove anything," Helena said, but she sounded terrified. "Actually, I can prove everything." Marcus finally spoke, his voice cutting through their panic like ice. "Bank records showing embezzlement from the trust. Communications proving conspiracy. And enough evidence of fraud to put all three of you in prison for the next 20 years. But here's the thing," Natasha continued, enjoying the growing horror on their faces. "I don't want to see you in prison. That would be too easy, too quick." She moved to the fireplace, running her fingers along the mantel where family photos still included her image, as if the last 4 years had never happened. "I want you to live with the consequences of your choices. So here's what's going to happen." She turned back to face them. "You're going to call the trustees tomorrow and confess everything. The lies, the financial manipulation, all of it. And if we don't?" Camila's voice was barely a whisper. "If you don't, I'll release these recordings to every media outlet in the country. Your husband's law practice will be destroyed, your reputation will be in ruins, and you'll face criminal charges for conspiracy and attempted murder." "You can't do this to us," Helena pleaded. "We're your family." "No," Natasha said with quiet finality. "Family doesn't try to have each other killed. You forfeited that right 4 years ago." The silence stretched until Ryan cleared his throat. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to disappear from my life forever. Once the trustees redistribute the inheritance properly, you take your share and leave San Francisco. I never want to see any of you again." "And Marcus?" Camila's eyes darted between them. "What happens to your attack dog when this is over?" Natasha felt Marcus tense behind her, but she kept her voice steady. "Marcus has been very helpful. I'm sure we'll figure out an appropriate arrangement." It was then that Ryan did something that surprised everyone in the room. He laughed. "You really think you've won, don't you?" His voice carried a note of hysteria. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." "What's that supposed to mean?" Natasha demanded. Ryan turned to Marcus with a smile that was pure poison. "Tell her, Marcus. Tell her who you really are." Marcus had gone very still, his face carved from stone. "Ryan, don't." "Marcus Kane isn't his real name," Ryan continued, his voice gaining strength. His real name is Marcus Volkov. And 4 years ago, he was the man I hired to investigate you before I broke our engagement. The words hit Natasha like physical blows. The room spun around her as the pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. That's right, Ryan's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your new partner, your lover, your co-conspirator? He's the reason I knew all your secrets, all your vulnerabilities. He's the one who helped me time the betrayal for maximum damage. Natasha turned to Marcus, searching his face for denial, for anything that would make Ryan's words a lie. Instead, she found guilt and something that might have been shame. Is it true? She whispered. Marcus's silence was answer enough. The night of your birthday party, Ryan continued relentlessly, Marcus gave me the final report on your psychology, your weaknesses, the best way to break you completely. Every detail about how you'd react, how far you'd fall, how long it would take you to recover. He planned it all. Stop. Marcus's voice was sharp, dangerous. She deserves to know the truth about her knight in shining armor. She deserves to know that everything she thinks she feels for you is built on the same lies that destroyed her the first time. Natasha felt something vital shatter inside her chest. The betrayal 4 years ago had been devastating, but this was complete annihilation. Because this time, she'd chosen her destroyer. This time, she'd walked willingly into the trap. Get out, she said quietly. Natasha, let me explain, Marcus started. Get out. The words tore from her throat with such force that everyone in the room flinched. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes full of something that might have been regret. Then he turned and walked out through the French doors, disappearing into the night like the shadow he'd always been. In the silence that followed, Natasha felt the last of her illusions crumble to dust. She'd thought herself strong enough to play with fire without getting burned. Instead, she'd handed her heart to the architect of her destruction and called it partnership. Now you understand, Camila said softly. You can't trust anyone, Natasha. Not even the people who claim to love you. For the first time in 4 years, Natasha Monroe had no response at all. 2 months later, Natasha stood in her penthouse office overlooking Silicon Valley, staring at the legal documents spread across her desk. The trust money had been released, all $47 million. Her family had kept their word, confessing to the trustees and disappearing from San Francisco as promised. She'd won completely and utterly. So why did victory taste like ashes in her mouth? The intercom buzzed. Ms. Monroe? Your 3 o'clock is here. Natasha frowned. She hadn't scheduled any meetings for the afternoon. Who is it, Sarah? He says his name is Marcus Kane. He looks like he hasn't slept in weeks. Natasha's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. Send him up. She had exactly 3 minutes to compose herself before the elevator doors opened and Marcus stepped into her office. Ryan had been right, he looked like he hadn't slept since that night in her mother's sitting room. His expensive clothes hung loose on his frame, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of demons she couldn't imagine. You look terrible, she said without preamble. I feel worse. Marcus moved toward her desk but stopped when he saw the way she tensed. Thank you for seeing me. I almost didn't. Natasha remained behind her desk, using it as a barrier between them. What do you want, Marcus? Or should I say, Mr. Volkov? He flinched at the name. I want to tell you the truth. All of it. The truth? That's rich, coming from you. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Which version of the truth are we talking about? The one where you were hired by my sister to spy on me? Or the one where you were originally hired by my ex-fiancé to destroy me? Both. And neither. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar. Yes, Ryan hired me 4 years ago to investigate you. Yes, I provided him with psychological profiles that he used to time maximum damage. But that's not the whole story. Then enlighten me. Marcus moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghostly in the glass. I was 26 years old and desperate for money. My sister was dying of cancer, and the experimental treatments weren't covered by insurance. When Ryan offered me $50,000 for a psych evaluation, I took the job without asking questions. Despite herself, Natasha felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Your sister? Anya. She was 19, brilliant, and the only family I had left. Marcus's voice was barely audible. She died 6 months after your birthday party, and I've spent every day since then knowing that her last months of life were paid for with your pain. The admission hung between them like a wound. Natasha wanted to stay angry, to hold on to her rage like armor. But she recognized the raw grief in his voice because she'd heard it in her own. That doesn't excuse what you did. No, it doesn't. Marcus turned from the window to face her. But maybe it explains why I've spent the last 4 years tracking every move your family made, documenting every crime they committed against you. Why I was ready with evidence the moment Camila hired me. Natasha's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that everything I gave you was real. The recordings, the financial documents, the proof of conspiracy. I'd been building that case against them since the day after Anya's funeral. Marcus's storm-gray eyes were intense, desperate. I couldn't undo what I'd done to you, but I could make sure they never hurt you again. So this was all about guilt? About easing your conscience? It started that way. Marcus moved closer, his movements careful and deliberate. But the moment I saw you at that gala, the moment I watched you handle your family with such strength and grace, guilt wasn't enough to explain what I felt. Stop. Natasha held up a hand. Don't you dare try to tell me you love me. Not after everything. I'm not going to tell you I love you, Marcus said quietly. I'm going to tell you that you saved me. The words hit her like a physical blow. For 4 years, I've been a ghost. Going through the motions of living while drowning in guilt and self-hatred. But watching you transform your pain into power, watching you refuse to let betrayal break you, you showed me what survival actually looks like. Natasha felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. That doesn't change what you did. The lies you told. The only lie I told you was my name. Marcus was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Everything else, the attraction, the partnership, the way I felt when I kissed you, all of that was real. How can I believe you? How can I believe anything you say? Instead of answering, Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. What is that? The deed to a property in Prague. It's where I've been for the last 2 months, settling my sister's affairs and liquidating everything I own. He set the envelope on her desk. Inside is also a check for $2 million, every penny I've made from jobs like the one Ryan hired me for. Blood money. Natasha stared at the envelope without touching it. Why are you giving this to me? Because I want you to choose what happens to it. Donate it to charity, burn it, keep it, I don't care. But I need you to know that I'm not that man anymore. The man who would sell someone's secrets for money died the same night your trust in me did. And what are you now? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since he'd entered her office, it reached his eyes. Now I'm a man who's willing to spend the rest of his life proving that some betrayals can lead to redemption. If you'll let me. I can't. The words came out as a whisper. I can't trust you. I can't trust anyone. I know. Marcus reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. But maybe someday you can trust yourself enough to take one more risk. Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her forehead with such tenderness that her heart cracked open despite all her defenses. I'll be in Prague, he said against her skin. Working with refugees who've lost everything and need help starting over. If you ever want to find me, you know where I'll be. Marcus walked to the elevator without looking back, but just before the doors closed, he spoke one final time. For what it's worth, Natasha, you didn't just save me. You taught me that some people are worth becoming better for. The doors closed, leaving Natasha alone with the envelope and a choice that would define the rest of her life. 3 weeks later, Natasha Monroe stepped off a plane in Prague carrying nothing but a single suitcase and a heart that had learned the difference between betrayal and transformation. She found Marcus exactly where he'd said he would be, in a refugee center, teaching computer skills to families who'd lost everything but refused to lose hope. When he saw her standing in the doorway, his face went through a dozen emotions before settling on something that looked like wonder. "You came," he said simply. "I came to tell you something." Natasha stepped into the room full of hope and second chances. "I donated the money to cancer research. In your sister's name." Marcus's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "And I came to tell you that I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting other people's betrayals define who I'm allowed to become." "What are you saying?" Natasha smiled, and for the first time in 4 years, it was completely without armor or artifice. "I'm saying that maybe the best revenge against the people who tried to destroy us is to build something beautiful from the ruins they left behind." Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered her into his arms, spinning her around as laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep in both their souls. When he set her down, they were both crying and smiling and holding on to each other like lifelines. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, his forehead pressed against hers. "Now we find out if 2 broken people can heal each other without cutting themselves on the sharp edges. I like our chances." As the Prague sunset painted the refugee center in shades of gold and possibility, Natasha Monroe finally understood that some stories don't end with revenge or justice or even love. Sometimes they end with redemption, which is rarer and more precious than any of those things. Sometimes they end with 2 people who have every reason not to trust choosing to trust anyway, because the alternative, living in fear forever, isn't really living at all. The end. Like if you love intense romance stories. Subscribe for more emotional storytelling. Hit the bell for notifications on new uploads.